Welcome, everyone, to this week's XojoTalk podcast. I'm Paul Lefebvre, the Xojo developer evangelist. And this week, my special guest is Justin Elliott. He is the IT and development manager at Penn State University. Welcome, Justin.
Thank you, Paul. I appreciate the invite.
Well, I'm glad to have you. We talk all the time at XCC and at other times, and seems like logical for you to be on the XojoTalk podcast. So, as I like to do at the beginning of these podcasts, why don't you give our listeners some background as to how you came to use Xojo and the sort of things you use it for?
Sure. Yeah, I'd be happy to. So, in 1999, I graduated with my master's in computer science, and my wife was looking for a graduate school, so we came to Penn State University. And a fellow coworker could tell that I was really into other programming utilities back in the day, like FaceSpan and AppleScript, of course. And he says, "Hey, you should really check this thing out called Real Basic." And I said, "Okay." So I took a look at it, and this was back in the days of OS 9. Okay, so anyway, we needed an authentication login tool for OS 9. This was when OS 9 was in, like 9.2 Mac OS 9.2.1, and it was on its last leg. But it was a fun project for me to write. So I wrote our login tool so users could log in. This is when the Mac OS did not have multi-users. You did, but it was, not as formalized back then. At any rate, so we wrote it in Real Basic, and that turned out really to work very well. And then wrote some other tools that helped us change and set the IP settings on machines after they got built. And so I wrote that also with Real Basic at the time. And so miscellaneous tools, and that really paid off. And that was really exciting for me and a lot of fun. That was about 2000, 2001. Then OS 10 came out, and then I was using, of course, I was in love with Real Basic at that time. And at the time, a tool to automate the entire process of configuring the firmware passwords, restoring the system disk image, erasing the disk, running pre and post restore scripts to prepare the OS for login, logout tasks, setting up printers that log in, things like that. An imaging tool that really did all of that didn't exist. So I developed it for just Penn State internally, and the tool was called, and is still called today, Blast Image Config. It's a pretty long name. It definitely harkens back to the old days when everybody wanted to have really long application names. But it was something that I really enjoyed writing, and it was a great combination of my computer science geek background, doing system administration, and also writing a utility that actually had purpose. Because when I write something, I want it to actually be used for something. It's still fun to experiment with programming, to learn new techniques, event-driven model, which I'm getting most of the time correct, and then Kem helps me and corrects me and says, no, don't write it that way, you old procedural guy. You should write it this way. Okay, thanks. He's right. So wrote some tools, wrote Blast Image Config. That's over. That was in, where are my notes? It's been a while now, since 2003. So it's 12 years old now. I continue.
That would explain the name. Blast Image Config absolutely sounds like an OS 9 app era name kind of thing.
Well, it was a holder. Yeah, I first developed it on, I was thinking about writing for OS 9 at the time, and Ken's like, my coworker at the time, he said, no, get it ready for OS 10. I said, okay. So yeah, but it's been an OS 10 tool only, but it almost was an OS 9 tool at the time. So that's been a lot of fun. I still maintain that today, and it's been working. It's actually the cornerstone of our collaborative lab management program today at Penn State for the Macs, and it has additional features that are specific to Penn State, but it's also still used as a generic imaging tool for others out there at corporations and other EDU institutions. It's free. People can use it if they want to, and there are other good tools out there as well, like Deploy Studio and other things like that. But I think it fulfills a nice niche. I think it has some better features over Deploy Studio. Deploy Studio has some other features over it. So it's one of those things. Anyway, moving on. So I've written some other smaller apps using, of course, Xojo and Real Basic, Real Studio. Over the years as its name changed, the tools stay the same for the bigger projects. One of the other ones I wrote was a newsflash application. It actually uses the macOS lib framework,
right?
Libraries, I should say, that have direct declares and APIs to native Cocoa API calls. And I needed that so that I could write an app that's a background application that has a menu bar item. and that works very well. So when users log in, it calls, and it's a completely Xojo. Doesn't use any plugins whatsoever. It's all native Xojo, using the built-in database calls, prepared statements, all of those beautiful things. And then when the user logs in, calls the database, hey, Paul's logging in with a specific user ID, of course. Does he have any unread messages? Yes. Okay. And then it displays it in a global floating window, and they can either read it or close and dismiss, similar to the OS X's notification system. And then, so that's been a small app. Then I've written some various command line utilities for setting the firmware passwords, so we can automate that through our distribution system. But the other one that was a really fun thing, and this is where Xojo really, really paid off. I'm one of the founders of the Mac Admins conference here at Penn State. It's a conference that we've been running since 2010. This is our 6th year, and in the first couple of years were grassroots and wasn't really outside of Penn State. But then people heard about it and said, "Hey, can I come too?" And we all said, "Sure." And so it's grown quite a bit, and we're expecting 600 attendees this year. So we're looking forward to that. Yeah. But 8 weeks out from our 2013 conference, the conference team and we were meeting, and they said, "Hey, Justin, it would be great if we had some type of conference application that was displaying the sessions, between the sessions, that is, on the projectors and played music. And then when the session started, switched to a counter for speakers so that we could have a monitor in the back of the room that speakers would then see, and it would change from green, you're good on time, orange, red, yellow, all of those colors to time down and say, hey, wrap it up." And I said, "Guys, we only have 8 weeks." They said, "Yeah, that's all right. You can do it, right?" And I said, "I'll try. Sure." And so in 8 weeks and 5 days from start to finish, I wrote completely in Xojo, real basic at the time, Real Studio at the time, completely start to finish an application that basically runs on a Mac OS X laptop. It could run on Windows too, of course, but I chose OS X because that's where I'm comfortable. And it talks to a service that's for scheduling conference sessions, and it talks over HTTPS using an API call, parses JSON, gets a JSON dump of the sessions, sorts all of that, and the built-in JSON support to Xojo Real Studio at the time was huge. I thought, okay, let's see if they have this, and sure enough, they did. I mean, I could have written a parser for it, but the JSON support was so good, and it just worked beautifully. I'm like, oh, this is fantastic. So I got JSON parsing working. I got the logic working. And then we finally got down 2 weeks before the conference was starting. This was 6 weeks into development. I said, I should probably start working on the UI now, huh?
Yeah, that was the part people are going to see. They're going to want
Right, exactly. But I knew I had to get the glue working and everything else of the timing, because the timers were essential. Because, if when is the next session in this room, and sorting it by time, and okay, so when the application starts up, it would say, is this the correct time? And what room am I in? Because then it knows, okay, I'm only going to display sessions for the particular room, which makes sense.
Yep.
And so working with some others on the team, I said, okay, 2 weeks out, what do we want the UI to look like? And they're like, wow, okay, let's go. And it came together beautifully, very quickly. The list box view was very nice to draw, and it meshed together really, really well. And I was super, super happy. So. And I did a little bit of testing, very little testing. It was kind of scary because when, at the time that conference had 2013, we had probably 275 attendees at the time, I think. And I thought, oh God, my app's in front of everybody. I hope it doesn't crash or do something weird. It didn't crash. It did everything great, but it did do one thing that was really kind of funny and weird. I thought I could be smarter, and I was not at this case, as we've all learned, I can do it better. Well, sometimes you can, sometimes no. I wrote a random music player that would play the music that I thought was a good algorithm for randomization so that it wouldn't repeat, and I overthought the process. And so what happened is, it turns out the Daft Punk Get Lucky song played quite a bit for some reason, and it was not hard-coded, it was not intentional. And there was obviously an error in my algorithm, and a lot of people said, what's going on? This is kind of strange. And sure enough, I looked at it. I wasn't doing the right. So you may remember, Paul, when I was asking about the random, what random generator do you guys have in Xojo? And I think Norm responded with Fisher-Gates algorithm.
Right.
And I said, and everybody's like, just use that. I'm like, well, but okay. All right. Yeah.
Everyone just thought you really like Get Lucky.
Right. They thought for some reason I was favoring this, trying to make a joke out of it, but I didn't. So anyway, I fixed that, moved to Fisher Yates, and guess what? The random generators, pretty good. Something's been established for a long time. So.
Yeah. Certainly when there's traditional algorithms have been around a long time, as fun as it might be sometimes to implement your own, it rarely comes out well.
Yeah. It's been time tested and proven. Just like in 8th grade when I was learning computers, I thought I invented pointers on the Counter 64, and I said, "Oh, great! I can change where the memory is for this sprite, however you want to say it." And then I go to college, and I'm like, "Oh, okay, yeah, all right. I've got some things to learn."
This is already a thing, right?
Right? So, yeah, exactly.
Right. So your app sounds really useful. Do you only use that with your conference, or do you share it with other people to use, or sell it, or anything?
I can't sell it because it's part of the intellectual property agreement that I signed when I got hired to Penn State. But right now, it's not open source, but it could be. It's very specific to working with Sketch.org and their JSON implementation of their API, but it could be updated to work with other tools. I haven't put it out for free yet. I might. It's, I've got Coder Vanity, so it's got some timers and things. And the code that I'm working on right now is to actually move it to more of an event-based driven type thing. I still need timers for the UI updates, of course, but
right.
The geek in me is a little upset because there's some minor bugs that I'm like, this would be cleaned up if I just simplified this. So again, I'm now down to the wire because our conference starts is July 7th. I can do this. Even if I'm going to WWDC next week, I can still do this, right? Sure. It's not a total rewrite, so it should be okay, I guess. So,
well, that's what the best developers always say. So
yeah, sure. Right. In between me being an IT manager, I get to develop maybe 5% of my time.
Oh, goodness. Yeah.
I wish it was more.
That does not give you a lot of time to work through that. Well, still, that sounds like a pretty cool tool. And no, I agree with you. It's hard when you make something and it's working for you to kind of just share it with lots of people. And then all of a sudden you get all these eyes looking at your code that you're like, oh, this code kind of sucks. And now everyone's going to look at it and they're going to tell me it sucks. And that rarely happens. It's much like, when people do public speaking, they often get very nervous because they're afraid, people are going to heckle them or, something like that. And that also never happens because, other people are just as, they're impressed that you did this sort of thing. So they're not going to try and drag you down necessarily. And, I put out the Xojo Wars stuff on GitHub, and, that is quite possibly some of the worst code I've ever written. But the game works, and that's all that matters.
Oh, no, I agree with you because that's what I've ended up telling other people. Hey, as long as it works, don't beat yourself up because I manage some system administrators and they all have various levels of programming skills, and that's fine. And, some of them have more skills in databases or servers, and some want to do more programming. Some are doing more programming than others, and that's fine. It comes down to as long as it doesn't eat memory or CPU and it works. Other than that, hey, that's great. As long as you have it in our Git repository, I'm happy. So,
right.
Yeah, I agree.
Get your code out there, get it working, share, and once you share it, you may get some solid feedback from people that will offer you ideas and suggestions that you'll be like, oh, I hadn't considered that. Oh, that is a better idea. And you'll learn new things. So it's definitely worth doing. And I have seen a lot more people in the Xojo community putting up stuff on in open source projects. GitHub in particular has been getting a lot lately. I need to. I think I mentioned this on another podcast, but I need to go through our list of open source projects now because we got so darn many. I got to put them in some sort of order with some descriptions so people can actually know what they are, what they're about, and have them categorized or something. Because there's just, it went from like in the span of a couple of years, like a tiny handful to I think it's over 30 now.
Is that many now? Yeah. iOS Lib looks amazing as well. And Kem has done a fantastic job, and others, of course, on macOS Lib. And the Windows suite, what was it called?
The Windows functionality suite. Yep.
Yeah, I had that from years ago, and I knew it found a new home, and I remember Scott Boss and others, they were helping to keep track of that. But I used that as well when I was developing on Windows app with Xojo. So
right, and some of those are going to need a little bit of tweaking for the upcoming 64-bit world because of how they're written to directly access OS APIs that were 32-bit at the time, and now they'll need to be tweaked so that they can call the 64-bit stuff. But they're open source, so anybody has the source, can make changes that they need, so they're not too locked down in that manner.
Yep, absolutely. It's good stuff.
Well, that's a lot of utilities and apps you've been building for someone that has only 5% time to develop.
Well, there was a lot more time at home before my son was born 4.5 years ago. But yeah, I still develop some of it now when I can. And I was developing a front end for some other fun things at home, and I was finishing that up 2 weeks prior to my son being born. So I was up till midnight numerous nights. So, but yeah, it's been fun over the years. I still go back to Xojo as my favorite go-to for programming. I've done Perl and Shell and DT facespan and all those things in the time, but I'm playing around with Swift, looking at that for iOS, but my skills and interest in language familiarity was best with Xojo at this point. And the cross-platform is something I never really thought I would actually enjoy. In fact, when you guys moved from, you didn't move at all from OS 10. I should say when you guys started adding Linux and Windows, and I'm sure I'm not the only one that felt this way. We're thinking, oh gosh, what's happening? Are you going away from OS 10 or the Mac platform in general? And that wasn't the case at all. But when I was working on a project at home and I wanted to run on Linux or Windows, I thought, whoa, now the payoff is huge. It's actually been very beneficial for me to have Xojo. And we use that in our offices here at Penn State because we have mini Linux servers. We don't run OS 10 servers much anymore. We have a few that we're getting rid of this November, finally. But anyway, it was nice hey, we've got this framework. We know it really well. It's obviously very well supported on Linux, especially console applications, and that worked out beautifully for us. So,
oh yeah, I was going to ask you what you primarily use for equipment there at Penn State, because I presume it would be a lot of Macs. But yeah, it makes sense that the server's going to be Linux. Everyone's servers these days are Linux-based.
We've got some Windows. We've got some Windows as well. We've got a very large compellent SAN storage in the department that I work in. Is classroom and lab computing within teaching and learning and technology within ITS at Penn State. So it's a long tree there. But we mostly Dell servers. I haven't been in the server room in quite a while, which is nice because I used to do that. But at the time, I was doing OS 10 servers. And we've moved to Dell rack servers, and we have a lot of VMware and it'll be interesting to see also with more cloud-based services as well. That's an interesting place to be. I know other universities have been moving their infrastructures less from their own data centers to potentially looking at, other cloud providers, I should say, with different various levels of access to the stack. The phrase of, do you still want to hug your servers? Do you really want to maintain all of that? Or do you want to have a company do that for you and you can focus on more of the things that you're good at rather than the things you don't want to have to do?
Right. Well, I mean, somewhat related to that, my wife was telling me this morning that she has a Girl Scout troop with my daughter in it. And she was telling me the Girl Scout troop's email's been down for like 3 days because there was a thunderstorms that rolled through here in Maine several days ago, and the lightning strike took out wherever they had their email servers hosted.
Oh, wow.
And I was a little incredulous. I'm like, they host their own email here in Maine?
Right.
And I was like, seriously?
Right. Yeah.
And yeah, so I mean, that's the sort of thing is that, maybe they're not necessarily experts in that. Apparently they didn't have some sort of fallback for if this data center got hit by lightning. And maybe it's not the end of the world for something like Girl Scouts, but sometimes that's just something you don't want to really have to deal with, let someone else do.
Yeah, I mean, back in the day of, we can do it better, we can roll our own. I love servers. Well, after so many nights, this is not an exaggeration. When I was more of a server admin, I was starting a backup, sitting in my walk-in closet on the floor with my laptop, starting a backup at 4 a.m. Okay, I'm going to go drive in, and on my system, our system admins, they don't want to touch the servers as much. And then VMware and other server virtualization is really nice, but again, we're taking it one level further. Maybe cloud providers, like Amazon or Google or Microsoft, and all of those options are pretty appealing because their business is that, and they do it very well. So there'll still be need for servers on campus for really sensitive data potentially, but even then, we're trying. I think it's an interesting space to review or look at.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you can electricity costs. You're moving all that out, so that's a benefit. And yeah, one of the last places I had worked, I guess it was like 10 years ago now, they had wasn't a big company by any stretch. We had a server room, and I mean, they had machines in there that were like the size of a couple little dorm fridges for servers, and they were slow too. And
yeah,
before I left, I spearheaded the switch over to get some actual just rack blade things put in place with virtual machines on all of them, and we ended up, getting the server room down, it had dozens of these big fat machines in there pumping up all kinds of heat to I think we just had a single rack at the end that had way more capacity and usefulness because you could flip the VMs on and off when you needed them. They were much easier to upgrade. Putting RAM in was a lot easier because you just update the whole thing and you can reallocate the RAM to the VM. So, and this was 10 years ago. And, hopefully most people are doing that sort of thing at the very least now. And then, cloud is probably the next step.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think there'll be a nice hybrid too, because I think some cloud providers will, handle Linux potentially better. Others will have scaling database services. Others might handle Windows servers better, might have Active Directory integration. All that kind of space is interesting to view or to evaluate. But you're right. I mean, that one of the pushes here at Penn State, I think, has been power consumption and where we want to spend our time. So it's an interesting place to be. I'm not officially stating anything on the podcast of what Penn State's doing. I'm not speaking for Penn State.
No, these are just observations.
Yeah, you're not just observation. I mean, it's public knowledge. A lot of this is out there, so it's not me revealing anything that was a hush-hush or anything, just so people don't assume.
Right. And it is, one thing, I remember when OS X Server was initially introduced, and it was... I did use it on a few projects for a little while, but Apple really seems to be walking away from that. I mean, they don't even make any server hardware anymore. They still sell the software, but without any real Apple server hardware to run it on, I can't imagine it's used by many people, if anyone really, that doesn't have to.
I agree. The only purpose that we've really seen for an OS X server per se, regardless if it's running on a Mac Mini or otherwise, but is to run virtualized desktops for OS X with Aqua Connect or something else that does something similar. In that case, you'd want a really nice high-end Mac Pro, but the video cards are overkill for that scenario. But you may want some remote applications is an area that's interesting. And for Windows, you can do that a little bit easier. OS X, I'm not so sure that works as well, but there are options out there too. But I don't know. Yeah, it's OS X server. It's gone. I have it at home for fun, for caching, and I have it so I can use it as a VPN, and that's what I use it for home.
That would make sense. But I have a VPN, but I have a quote cloud VPN, so I pay like $5 a month for my VPN. So
that's not bad, and it's always up, and mine is sometimes not up, and I'm like, okay, I'll go home and start it again.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Well, that's quite a lot of stuff that. You are making. So are other people in the organization working with Xojo at this point, or is it primarily you that is whipping out these utilities and tools?
We've got some other folks, at Penn State. Pat Bazong runs a company on the side. He writes his tool. Oh, he's going to be mad at me if I don't remember the name. But basically, it's for captioning a QT captioner. Basically, it's an easier way. I'll double check that.
You can get me the link after too. I can put it.
Yeah, I'll do that. But anyway, it's a really nice application that helps you to play back videos, and you can then enter closed captioning comments right at the time. So it's a way to write in the codec captions based on the time of the video. So for Penn State, that's a pretty big thing because we need to do a lot of closed captioning of videos. So his tool really helps that, and that's written in Real Basic. I think he's still in Real Basic, but he's working on upgrading to Xojo soon. So he's had really good success with that, and we use it quite a bit in my department for the apps that I've written. Others are looking at Python and some other tools, but there might be some other folks at Penn State that I don't know about. But it's no secret that I'm a Xojo fanboy. So And I try not to be too pushy with it and say, well, Xojo could do this. But like any tool, regardless of if it's Xojo or not, I know everybody knows this probably, but oftentimes I see somebody saying, oh, you should use this tool. Well, it doesn't work really well for that. Yeah, but you should use it. Well, no. There's always a tool that's best for a particular scenario, and we do a pretty good job of that. If it's Perl, I don't like Perl, actually, and I know it really well. Python is the thing to go to for a lot of scripting these days. Bash is still a good one, but Xojo, sometimes you don't need to, and it's overkill because it is really powerful and can do a lot of stuff, but it takes a little bit more time in some cases. So,
right. Well, any good developer is going to have multiple things in their toolkit that they can choose and collect them together or pick the right one for a certain task. Yeah, I mean, you don't want to be the guy that just has a hammer and is trying to use it for everything, and and ends up making stuff that isn't well built because of it.
Right. And I'm not going to, I mean, everybody probably knows, and I'll say it here too, because it is the XojoTalk podcast, of course. But I mean, I'll look for the excuse to do it in Xojo first, but then I have to bring myself back and say, all right, wait. Okay. Does it make sense? Nah, not for this one. But for the Newsflash application, yeah, absolutely.
Right.
Yep.
So you said you had this conference coming up in a little over a month or so. So
yep.
You want to talk a little bit about that? You said it's called Mac Admins, and
sure, absolutely.
Let me guess that's for people that use Macs and do some sort of administrative type stuff.
You are quick. Yes, that's exactly right. Yeah, it came out of the long story short, and you're thinking, is this really going to be short? In 2003, I started a Mac admins group here at Penn State. It was basically just a listserv, and with Apple and working with Apple, that is, we set up an occasional community meeting, bi-monthly and things like that, and tried to make it relevant topics. And then throughout the years, of course, had more friends at Penn State, and some friends and I, Dave Test, Rusty Myers, and I were on a trip back from Macworld in January of 2010. And we're bored. We're waiting for our next flight. And Rusty brings up, and we've all been kind of talking about this. And he said, hey, wouldn't it be cool if we could do a conference at Penn State for the Mac admins community? And I said, yeah, sure. Yeah, let's try that. I said, okay. And Dave Test says, yeah, let's try it. Why not? And we actually put the conference on. Now, granted, this was only with 100 people, and it was really only intended for Penn State initially. We did it 2 months later. It was crazy. It was crazy busy. Apple actually helped us out. They helped us. They did not sponsor it, but they helped us in different ways because Apple, is very careful with what they sponsor, and I understand that. But they were there to help us and be supportive and get the word out for us. And we had 100 people, and then it was free registration. And Rusty and I and others, and our Penn State Apple rep at the time, helped to put on the sessions. Rusty and I were extremely busy with sessions. It was fun. And then we realized the second year, okay, let's do this again. And so we opened it up a little bit more because people heard about it. And then it got so big, we had to move it to the Penn Stater, which is a big conference center here at Penn State. And it took off from there. And we slowly increased the price. We try to keep it as low as we can because we are not for profit on the conference. Mm-hmm. So we're told not to make a profit. Yeah, that's easy to do, and but don't lose money, and that's also not easy to do. So here we are sweating. What's the lowest possible price we can do, but not make a profit, but protect ourselves for the years to come. You know how it goes. Yep. So it's grown this year. Yeah, we're shooting to get 600 attendees. We have over 50 sessions, 70 speakers. So the numbers are looking really good.
And this is right at Penn State.
Yes, this is actually at University Park campus. The Penn State Conference Center is the major conference center here. 600 people. The dates of the conference are July 7th through the 10th. That includes, it starts on a Tuesday. The Tuesday is a full day workshop that attendees can pick. Last year, it was an optional thing where they could pay an additional fee to go to the workshop if they wanted to. It was so popular, we added it and included it in registration this year. So the first day is a workshop on multiple topics, you name it, security, Wi-Fi. It's an all-day deep dive on that particular topic. Then the next day is our standard 75-minute conference sessions, and the conference ends at 1:30 on Friday. So to give people time to go home and commute back to where they want to go rest their heads. So yeah, it's been extremely well received, and we've all done presentations over the years. I've done some on Big Surprise, Blast Image Config, and I've done some on Git. Another big surprise, right?
Yes, definitely on Git. I will probably talk about that a little bit coming up too.
Yep. So over the years, it's been fun, and organizing it, doing presentations and all that. Holy cow, it's a lot of work, but it's fun. It's a nice change of the job. I will say this. It's funny, during the conference, one of the funny things I never learned, I learned it quickly, but it's always fun to mention it. I can't go to the sessions. I can, but then people see me, they know me, and not just me. I mean, it's anybody on the conference team. They'll say, oh, hey, there's Justin. Can I go talk to you? I have a complaint about the conference. Can you tell the speaker to, and I'm like, oh, okay, well, sure. How about you talk to them? And it's, can you have more cheese out at the break period? I'm like, oh, okay. I'm just trying to make sure between the sessions that my application that I wrote with Xojo, that is called, by the way, MCP. I'll talk about the naming here in just a minute. I know, right? Perplexing, but I'll get there. anyway, to make sure it's running correctly and behaving, and it does. I just like to be paranoid and run around. But so it's a fun week. And the week after, I can tell you this, I'm a little peopled out. I like people, but the week after that, we're exhausted and we're like, okay, leave me alone. Okay, we're good.
Yeah, no, I can understand. I mean, even the XDC conference, which is smaller than yours, I mean, it's exhausting, being around people and you're on the whole time and talking to people, especially when, at least all of us Xojo people, we all work at home and are alone all day. So it's a drastic shift for us.
Oh, probably a little bit. Yeah. The people factor. Yeah. But what's weird is the reason we keep doing it is because every year we love to build the Mac community. I've been there for 20 years in the Mac IT industry. I've presented at Macworld a few times on various topics. And the week of, I'll tell you, it's actually, I didn't think I'd appreciate this as much, but it's great to actually talk with people and they see that this huge train that we've put together that hopefully looks pretty and doesn't have any wheels that fall off stays on course and then wraps up by the end of the week. And it's a lot of fun. It's very rewarding, much more so than we ever expected. So we're looking forward to this year and it's going to be another great year. So the conference application, it's called MCP. There are two theories behind this. The theories of why is it called that? It's an acronym. Initially, we called it MCP because, as you probably know, I'm a huge Tron fan.
I don't think I knew that, but that doesn't surprise me.
Okay. Yeah, that's all right. I'll sniffle a little bit. But MCP is a reference to Tron, the Master Control Program.
Right. Yes. I have seen Tron. Yes.
Right. But, okay, at least you saw it. All right. That's good. Okay. I hope so.
I saw the new one too that came out a few years ago.
You did? Okay. All right. Good. Okay. Did you see 2001: A Space Odyssey?
I've seen that as well. Yes.
Okay. All right. I still like you. MCP could also stand for Mac Admin's Control Program. So it's a double whammy, right? You win on both ways.
You win. Well, I'd say they're both rather obscure, but
they are very exactly. And everybody kept asking us, "What is this?" And like, it's just something we need. So anyway, it's been fun. Hopefully it won't crash this year, and hopefully it'll continue to play random music well.
Cool. That's and you get to pick the music as well. So I doubt they'd ever let me do that for any conference I'm at, to pick music. But
that is a very difficult task because how do we make sure that it's clean lyrics? Then how do we make sure that it's, I like Dire Straits. No, they have a song that's bad. You can't play that one. Oh, that's right. And we don't want to offend anybody. We really don't. But people like the music. And
you don't want to pick elevator music either that, everybody just despises. So
what's wrong with bossa nova? I like bossa nova.
It's like the intro and the outro music that I do on these podcasts is kind of some rockin' guitar tune that I put in. And that's most of the type of music that I end up listening to. So it doesn't make good background music for most people.
That's all right. No, well, and yeah, one of the mornings of the conference, I'm running over to the laptop that's playing music in our app, and it's turned up pretty loud. And I go over and turn it down. Well, one of the other steering committee members doesn't tell me this, and he didn't know this, and I didn't know this. He wanted the music to be louder, so he was going over there and turning it up. But this is early in the morning when people are used to not waking up early and haven't had caffeine, and I go, right. That's way too loud. So we kept going back and forth, and I finally found out it was him. And I'm like, what are you doing? He goes, I'm trying to get people to wake up. I said, people don't want to wake up that fast. Let's turn it down a little bit. So it was kind of funny. Anyway.
That is funny. Well, I also want to mention to people, you probably at this point, if you didn't realize at the beginning, you're recognizing Justin's voice. He did a couple webinars for us last year on Git, one of his favorite topics to chat about. And he also did a session at XDC. I guess it was a month and a half ago now at this point on Git as well. So he's like, in the Xojo community is walking around with the Git flag telling people, what is the phrase you told me at one of the conference? Git is it. Git
is it. SVN is dead to me, but that's another thing.
Well, I've been using Git more and more, and certainly if people are curious about it, by all means, tune in to our 2 Git webinars that Justin did. Start with the first one so you get an overview, and then he does a deep dive into some more advanced features. But particularly one of the features that you talked about, Justin, was something called Git flow. That, when you were discussing at the time, I didn't really have an opportunity to play around with it, and I kind of forgot about it. But working with Kem on Xojo Unit recently, we flipped on Git flow for the Xojo Unit project that's on GitHub so that we can make some changes. And It's amazing how well that works.
It's pretty slick.
So, once you get the hang of that, how you can, work on your stuff in its own little feature branches without busting up the main released version, and then kind of just bubble things up until to a development branch. And then when you're happy, push it all the way up to the release branch.
Yeah.
It works really well, and it's made a great way for us to try different things. Without breaking anything. And, Kem can say, hey, I'm thinking of trying this, and he'll do a bunch of changes. They're all in a feature branch. I can pull them down and try them, and I can say, no, we don't want to go in that direction. We can just toss it. Or I can say, oh, this is great, and we can push it up to the development branch. And then when we get enough of our changes in, we can bubble it up to the master. So I'm really impressed with how that worked. But at the beginning, I got to say, I was a little intimidated by it, but it seems to work quite well. We're using for a client source tree from Atlassian. And obviously it works perfectly with Xojo. I mean, you just save as the text format, and boom, that's it. You get anytime you save, any files that are changed get marked, and you can tag them, commit them, put your comments in. It's got a built-in diff tool, so you can just, before you commit things, you can just click on the items and say, okay, yeah, that looks like the changes I thought I made. Everything looks legit. Put it in. It's definitely great. So I soon will also, I probably already have a little bit, have a Git flag of myself that I've been waving to people. But I appreciate you sharing that knowledge, because the little source control webinar that I did where I covered Subversion and Git was more on Subversion, because what I'm familiar with, and only covered Git on a very high level. And it's amazing how powerful it really is.
Yeah. Git was designed well from the beginning. It was nice that it's like any new technology, right? They all build on each other. They learn lessons from the previous. Hey, this was a pain point, and Git was designed from the beginning to handle branching very well. And I agree, Git flow has been phenomenal. And some people say, well, I want to use Git flow, but I don't want to follow. It looks too complicated for me to follow the whole thing. Well, you don't have to follow the entire process, because I've got actually a cheat sheet on my desk here. There's the master, hotfixes, release, develop, feature branches, and it comes down to, as long as you're branching, if you follow the Git flow mechanisms that are even just using hotfixes and using the development branch, that's what a lot of people do, then you're probably good to go. And then
absolutely.
Testing. It works well.
You don't have to use all the pieces of it necessarily. It's more like the name says, how it flows from, the lower levels back up to the top in the order you want. And it is, and, a lot of people that haven't used it will be like, everyone that uses Git is always talking about branching and branches here, branches there. And, in the case of Subversion, that's usually kind of freaky, because Subversion branching is troublesome, usually at best. And so people that use Subversion are like, branches, awful. And then Git uses lots of branches, so it must be awful. And but it seems to, like you said, it just deals with it so much better than Subversion ever did, in my experience. That it's not something to necessarily fear. Don't fear the branches, apparently, when you're using Git.
Right. Oh, I had the same reaction, because I was on Subversion for 4 years prior. And but I knew that there were some things holding me back, where I had to have a constant network connection. And like you said, the branching was a pain. And then checking it out the latency was slow, updating properties. And then going to Git, I said, okay. And I had learned about Git from Apple, because I saw that they were using it in one of the WWDC conferences I went to. And I said, well, if Apple's looking at it, all right, fine, I'll give it a chance. And I kept reading more about it, and I said, wow. And it was a mind shift from the SVN completely, but it was so much lighter weight, easier to switch. So each client has the full repository. You can switch very easily through branches. And the changes, the one thing that was huge for me, I think I've mentioned this in many of the presentations, is that Git it has a mini file system, and it keeps track of all the files. So if you move a file from one directory to another, it knows it's the same file. If it's a 10 gig or 2K file, it knows it's the same file. It doesn't need to copy it down and move around like SVN did. It moves in and says, oh, okay, updated the binary tree, the file system, it knows it's the same file, just as a different place in the tree. Okay, done. And it's so fast, you think, no way, it's broken.
Yeah, the speed is impressive, because when Kem and I were working with the different branches, he had me set up Git flow, and then I pulled stuff down, and I was like, okay, well, where's this, where's all the stuff, all the branches and everything? And he's like, well, it's only going to, make available what it is you're working on. And you switch between stuff, and it just instantly updates, and you work on that thing, and then you commit your stuff, and then you can switch to something else and work on it. And it's so speedy, especially when you're used to Subversion, kind of waiting and thinking and chugging and pulling stuff down.
Yeah. The fun thing about Git is that, and there's a good full length article on it. I'm probably not gonna do it justice, but this is funny. This is why I'm mentioning it. So Git checksums everything with a SHA-1 hash. And somebody asked one time, and Linus Torvald, the inventor of Git,
right,
or JIT, I guess, but I say Git. Somebody asked, well, isn't it possible that the two different files could someday have the same SHA-1 hash and there's a collision there? He goes, yeah, sure. But the chances in that happening are like 1 in 1 trillion of 1 trillion of whatnot. But he says, but if it does, we've got it built into Git to check, make sure it doesn't already exist. And it's a different file. What you do is you update the file and add a space or something to it. But I have not run into it yet. And I've been using Git a long time now. So with lots of projects, lots of files, I mean.
Well, you kind of think,
a interesting thing.
Yeah, you kind of think you'd have to have the world's largest project for that even to be a remote possibility. I mean, wouldn't that largely be irrelevant if, it's 2 files and 2 separate projects that happen to have the same hash? I mean,
yeah, exactly right. It has to be in the same repository. And I hear of another major project out there that uses Git quite a bit. I think it's called Linux. So
yeah, exactly.
So
it is funny how Mr. Torvalds there whips out Linux and then, in his spare time on a weekend or something, pushes out this Git thing, and both of them become incredibly popular and a foundation for a lot of businesses and software development.
Right. Oh, don't forget Linux. This is the year of the desktop for Linux, right?
Well, yeah, it's every year is, if I recall.
I love Linux Mint. I like it as a desktop. I still like OS 10, and I hope that Linux, every year it does get better. The audio drivers, video drivers are working a lot better. And I use it for arcade cabinets at home, and it works very well there. So I'm not ripping on Linux. I actually like it as a desktop quite a bit. It naturally excels at server implementations, of course.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and I agree. Linux Mint is probably the best desktop one that I've used over the years. I mean, they've gotten better, but Ubuntu got a little beefy and kind of heavyweight and stopped working as well. So it didn't give you as good a reason to use that over, OS 10 or Windows, because it wasn't like, lightweight and speedier. Whereas Mint is pretty lightweight, relatively speaking, and very speedy. It installs incredibly quickly.
Yep.
The UI is pretty intuitive, although not like a carbon copy of, OS 10 or Windows. So it's its own unique thing. It comes with a lot of built-in stuff, so you don't have to, find and download things. So that's a pretty good distribution. So hopefully that one actually does gain some traction on the desktop side. But, there's not a lot of companies that are going to offer Linux pre-installed. I mean, there are a few, but they're not well known. I've had some people at XTC, tell me about, a System something or other. I'll look it up for the show notes, but System 36 maybe is a company that sells pre-configured laptops with Linux. I'll look up the exact name in.
Oh, okay.
But it's not like you can just walk into Best Buy and pick up a laptop that's going to have Linux on it. So that really, no matter what, is going to limit its penetration, because if the average person has to buy a laptop and it comes with Windows, they're not likely to even know what they would do to wipe that and put Linux on. They're not going to want to do that. And that's just going to continue to limit its penetration, I think.
I agree. There is one Linux distribution I haven't tested yet. It's called Elementary OS.
I have tried that one, yeah.
Have you? What do you think?
Well, it's pretty much a carbon copy of OS 10, which I think is its claim. It's still in alpha. I think the last time I tried it was pre 1.0, but this was last year sometime, so I haven't looked at it again recently. But I didn't see any reason to use it. I mean, why not just use OS 10?
Yeah. Well, if you have a non-Apple laptop, then you might want to use it there, maybe.
Yeah, but I would think you probably would just want to use a Linux that is Linux, that projects as Linux rather than Linux that's trying to pretend it's OS 10. I mean, that seems kind of strange to me. But
yeah,
I mean, it was very pretty. I'll give it that.
Sure. No, I see what you mean. Because, there's some Linux Mint features, and not just, it's probably Ubuntu, where I can mounting a file share natively in the Finder or the desktop over SSH. That's pretty huge. I wish OS 10 could do that natively. Now, it could do it through MacFuse and some other tools that are add-ons, but the fact that Ubuntu does that, well, I should say Linux Mint 17 can do that natively. That was pretty nice.
Yeah, but most people probably aren't going to care about that.
Yeah, you're right. Is my mom going to care? She's very technical. I'm not saying she's not. She is, but you're right. She's probably not going to care about that.
So, speaking of Linux, there's probably some stuff you tend to do on Linux. And I've seen you on Twitter building these giant boxes and painting them in your garage. So why don't you talk to people about this cool little project that or projects that you tend to work on in your obviously much free time.
Right. My much free time. That would have been 4.5 years ago, before my son was born. So I'm a huge, as you probably know, but others may not, I'm a huge retro arcade fanatic. I'm an 80s kid. So I'm not going to reveal my age. That's not important. I'm not having more gray hairs lately. And my wife looks at my head and says,
no one on the podcast can see anybody's gray hair.
That's good. Yeah. Video killed the radio star. Okay. So, well, a buddy of mine and I, we were traveling to San Francisco. We went to a fantastic arcade on Fisherman's Wharf. It's called Musée Mécanique. I'm hopefully saying the name correctly. A fantastic arcade place. And they had cocktail tables, you name it, hockey, they had the original Star Wars. And, it was a dream. In the Tron, of course, and Moon Patrol and all these great things. I thought, maybe this is the time that I should just buy a Pac-Man table. And my buddy says, well, you can actually look for them on eBay, of course. And I knew that at the time. And he says, you could also build one. And I said, what? Build? And turns out people have, of course, the internet's awesome in most ways. People have actually documented the dimensions of cabinets, and Jacobud, a website called Jacobud, has free plans for the dimensions of arcade cabinets, the side, the front. And you can get some arcade art, or you can paint them yourself on the side and get creative with that. But if you search for MAME artwork and cabinets, you'll find a lot of designs out there. On SketchUp, the 3D warehouse, you can find designs and folks that have uploaded models. You can basically get the dimensions off of. So in 2009, I built an arcade cabinet, actually a cocktail table, I should say at first, because that was my first love. But my wife said to me, she goes, well, that's great, even though that one took me a lot of time because I had a lot of buttons on it. She says, I really like the miniature arcade cabinets. Can you build one of those? And I'm like, okay, sure. I love you, Heidi. And I said, sure. So I built the cocktail table. That was a lot of work. And basically, in the process, I'll sum it up. You have a PC running Windows or Linux or, of course, OS 10. At the time, I had a Mac Mini running OS 10. And with my Xojo written front app to launch and call MAME. Now, to be legal on ROMs, which everybody should be, you can buy ROM boards for games like Miss Pac-Man on eBay. And I did that. That's exactly what I did. I actually have a full-size Pac-Man cabinet also that I'm restoring now, that I have the full ROMs. So I'm legally allowed to play Pac-Man and Miss Pac-Man on my arcade cabinets because I own the ROM chips themselves.
Right.
So I'm not endorsing stealing ROMs and all of that, of course. I wish there was an easier way to buy the ROMs, though, from the companies. But there are a lot of open source games, too. But if you buy the ROMs off of eBay and then you find the ROM through the website, that's a gray area. I personally think that's all right. I may be wrong, but at any rate, the open source games, a lot of them are there as well. Plus, you can run Steam and have that in an arcade cabinet, which has a lot of great games, too, that are very retro and
right. Yeah. My son uses Steam a lot, and they have seems like that's the thing now, is to make games that look retro but do have some modern elements to it. So that's always fun to see.
Exactly. So, but basically, the cocktail table is wood. No surprise there. PC, and then a really cool little device. It's called an iPack. It is not related to Apple, but it basically converts. It plugs into USB, and then it's a PCB board, printed circuit board, that you connect a ground loop and wires to switches, such as joysticks and buttons. And then so you install the joystick and the buttons that you want. Then we'll run a wire. I used speaker wire. You can use anything. Run it back to this. Make sure you have a good ground loop, and it detects when you've pressed that down, and then sends it over the USB to the emulator, and it says, "Oh, you've pressed left. Okay, move the particular Pac-Man or Miss Pac-Man figure left." Right? It's that easy. Now, a lot of people say, well, why don't I just take apart a keyboard and use buy a $25 keyboard and just rip it apart instead of buying the iPack? Well, the iPacks are actually cheap. They're about $25, and they go up if you have more inputs, which I bought the really beefy ones because why not? But those keyboards by design are meant to block two keys being pressed at the same time.
Right, yeah, unless you get a very expensive gaming keyboard.
Right. Yeah, right. Yeah. So, and you might be wondering, well, why is that a bad thing? Well, you don't want when you're typing, you want to be able to only have one key, and if it has two, it might have an issue of which one to press. So, but this iPack, it actually does not. It's called non-blocking, so it doesn't block the key that you're pressing. And so, the reason this is useful is fighting games, especially. So, if you were going to play something that required multiple key presses at the same time for a combo move, you have your freeze fireball stuff. You want to throw out your opponent, then you can do that.
It's even useful with asteroids when you're spinning and shooting at the same time. So
that's right, asteroids. Oh yeah, deluxe even. Yeah, so I mean both versions, right? So yeah, so it's a lot of fun, and I've built a cocktail table that has now it has a Tron theme. I'm working on finding a trigger joystick that I like that's small. It's actually not easy to do to find one that fits. And then I built one Ms. Pac-Man themed, and then I built one also with Missile Command. Missile Command, that's the cabinet I had a lot of fun with. There was a RAM Controls in California. They're out of business now. Made cones. The cone, the first player and second player buttons that used to be a cone. It had a red LED flat button in the middle. They used to light up. I don't know if you remember those.
That sounds vaguely familiar. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. They were on Missile Command cabinets and trackballs, of course. I bought some of those, and I hooked them up through USB power, put a resistor in line so they light up correctly, and then the cabinet turned out really well. That was the cabinet I literally wrapped up. I was up to midnight, many, many nights before my wife delivered our son arrived. And she says, "You better finish up that cabinet before he gets here." I'm like, "Yes, ma'am, you got it." I was up many nights. It was fun. That was the last cabinet I built. I've got some more. I'm working with some friends in the basement right now, but they're taking much longer time, which is fine.
And you have all these like in your basement now? You got a room for them or something?
I have the most awesome wife in the world. I have an actually dedicated arcade room that has a pool table, and I've got 2 arcade cabinets in there and a cocktail table in there as well.
Nice.
So she's an awesome, awesome person, and she likes and a pinball table too, which I did not build, but someday I'm going to build one with a Raspberry Pi, running, using Xojo to control all the flippers and everything. That will be a fun project, and I'm going to build that.
Well, you did mention you use Xojo to make a front end app. What is that?
Thanks, Paul. Yeah, I got on a tangent there. So yeah, and this is where Xojo being cross-platform really paid off. Yeah, granted it was a home application, but I know it's worked for us in the office too. So the first machine I had was a Mac Mini, and I like Macs, but for an arcade cabinet, they're probably a little bit overpriced for the purpose, unless you're retiring one. I love OS 10. I love Macs. I have a lot of them. I have one at home, so I'm not bashing Apple. I use the OS and the machine that I like for the purpose. But at Penn State, we have some surplus machines. I got some cheap PCs, installed Linux on them, and got the audio and video drivers. Make sure the 3D acceleration works. But I thought, oh, hey, now I can develop this app for for Linux. Let's see if it works. Holy cow, it worked. And I had already been working on it OS 10. And then because of the help me here, Paul. It's the if then declare the pragmas
and the conditional compilation. Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, exactly. I could say if I'm on OS 10, do this. If I'm on Linux, do this. And I only had a few tweaks, and my app was running on Linux right away, full screen, audio playback, and it had a simple interface. And I made it really retro-y, and it worked with the joystick input to modify to navigate through the games, and it worked out beautifully. And I thought, oh, and so here I've got a cheap, PC Linux. It's just running arcade games, which doesn't take a lot of power, and it worked.
And it just shows a list of the games that the cabinet's able to play, and you just kind of choose one, and it starts it up, kind of thing.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. Yep. And then I've got a raw XML file that downloads from MAME, and then I parse that, and then I say, okay, which ones do I want to display? So, it's been a lot of fun. There are also arcade boards out there. There's a 16:1 arcade board you can buy that has a lot of games built in. So that's one that's fun to check out. So if you search for 16:1, it's about $53, $56. It's super cheap. Joysticks are about $15. You can find more expensive ones. Buttons are $2. You get an old LCD display off of eBay or otherwise, try to do a square aspect ratio if you can.
Right. Yeah. Especially those are pretty dirt cheap at this point. No one wants square monitors for anything.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And an 19-inch or whatever will work just great. So, anyway, yeah, it's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, that sounds awesome. Well, as all of you know, if you've been watching my webinars or paying attention to the Xojo War things, I kind of like retro gaming, probably for a different reason than Justin, because I'm not the least bit handy and probably couldn't carve a cabinet out of soap if I wanted to. But But I like playing those older games because they're simple, and I've never really been all that good at games. And, current games, unless they're attempting to be retro, are usually far more complicated than I want to bother with. And then it occurred to me sometime last year, probably after talking with Justin about something, that, actually it wouldn't be too hard to try making some retro games using Xojo. So I did a webinar on that back in October, and I made a very simple combat tank kind of game from a copy of the Atari 2600 one. I started an asteroids game, which I called Space Rocks, so I don't get the... I think Atari's now out of business, but I didn't want them chasing after me. And and I did demo Space Rocks at the conference, running on both desktop and iOS. And that code will be included in Release 3 of Xojo for people to play around with and enhance and add more features like shields and hyperspace and all that other cool stuff.
Excellent. Very nice. Yeah, I saw that at the conference. It was really cool. And now that's motivated me to make some iOS games too in Xojo soon.
Yeah, it's
hopefully next year I'll have something.
Yeah, those type of games are pretty easy to bang out, and because they don't have a lot of overhead, so that you're not gonna worry. You don't have to worry about speed or performance really, because it's more than up to the task, and then the graphics are pretty simple, obviously, so it's easy to draw. And the cool thing that I found when making them is that a lot of the sound effects are somewhere on the internet that you can find and use in your little app that you're making. So in my little Asteroids thing, I found exact sounds for the Asteroids arcade game online for the shooting and the spaceship and the little heartbeat background noise and stuff. So it makes it feel a little more authentic just by having the sounds than even if the rest of the game may not be 100%.
Speaking of iOS games written in Xojo, I forgot the name, but I actually bought it. It was announced at Xojo conference.
Yes, yeah, the one that I announced in my gaming session is by Xojo forum member Dave Duke. Created a game called, I believe it's Pixel Space Wars, I think is the title. I'll include a link in the notes for this. But it's a retro game that is kind of similar to something like Galaga, I guess, where you got a ship at the bottom and you're blasting aliens that are flying all over the place and they break apart. And its little twist is that everything's built out of pixels. So when you're blasting the aliens, they break apart into little pixels, and you don't destroy the alien until you knock off a majority of its pixels. And it's very fast-paced and action-oriented, made completely with Xojo, and it's just made using primarily a canvas with some timers and stuff. He gave me a quick demo of how he built it, and if you look at how I did the asteroids stuff. Asteroids is obviously way more simpler than his game from a amount of code perspective, but the overall initial structure is almost exactly the same. So yeah, it's an impressive piece of work, and he apparently was big making games back in the '80s on Commodore 64s and stuff. So he had some of that mindset in, so he was able to bang out his game. I think he told me like in a month, just working on the weekends. And
wow,
I'd say kudos to you, sir, because for those of us that don't have a lot of experience making games, it doesn't go quite so quickly.
Yeah. Oh, Dave Duke. I've got it here. Yeah, it's definitely, you nailed it. Dave Duke, Pixel Space War, 99 cents. Go get it. It's a lot of fun. The animation it was well done. The pixels, it's a great idea. So I'm jealous. I want to be able to build something like that eventually. And I will hope to next year for our Mac and Mints conference in 2016, if I can, ask Xojo folks to help me out maybe with a conference application sometime, maybe some tips and tricks. That would be great.
Based on the one that we had at XCC this year. Yeah, that probably wasn't pushed out in enough time for you to really
that's right.
Take a look at it. But yeah, I expect that would be something you should take advantage of next year. Absolutely. And you're going to WWDC next week, you said. So you got picked in the lottery, or do you get special pull from the school, or are you going to say no comment?
I'll say lottery. It was a lottery.
All right, cool. That's exciting. So you'll be on hand for they're having their announcements on Monday the 8th. As you can tell, by the time this podcast gets posted, this WWDC would probably already have happened. So Apple's announcements will already be known to everybody that's listening to this. But the big one I'm waiting to hear about is their streaming music service. I use Rdio now. I love listening to music, and I'm eager to see what Apple does and if it's anything different or better.
I'm a huge fan of Spotify. I resisted it for a while, but I absolutely love it. We've got LTE here, finally in State College, the big mecca city of State College. I love State College. And so and now once AT&T increased their quotas, I no longer, I've been spoiled by LTE speeds. I don't need to cache the music, but Spotify's been awesome. But I will be curious to see what Apple does. I haven't bought music since I have had Spotify and Pandora, which is for many years. So it'll be interesting to see what Apple does.
Yeah, it will be. Yeah, I've used Spotify, and occasionally they try to get me back by offering me some deal for like 3 months for $1, and I'll sign back up because I'm like, hey, that's good value. But every time I use Spotify, I don't really care for the iOS app, and I always fall back to using Rdio. And
okay. Spotify has a really cool new feature that's coming out later this year, though. It's actually available for some users. It's not available on my phone yet. It's a running app. So basically what it does is it can detect the rate at what you're running, and it will find music that has beats per minute to match your pace.
I heard of that. Yeah, I try to avoid running, so that won't do me much good.
I work out a couple of times. I don't like running as much, but for the folks out there who like running and I have Spotify, look forward to that. It's being released slowly on some phones.
Yeah. My wife's a runner, so she might find that sort of thing interesting, but I'm a casual walker.
There you go. You don't want to hurt yourself.
Well, right. Hey, what's the rush?
Right?
What's the rush? You're just going to run around circles. You end up back where you started, right? So.
That's right. Exactly. Unless you have a watch, an Apple Watch, which I do, and I love my watch. It's been very nice.
I'm not a watch-wearing guy, so much like when the iPhone came out and I said I'm not really a cell phone-carrying guy, and now, of course, I have an iPhone and I carry my cell phone everywhere. It'll take me years before I think I will consider wearing a watch again. But.
Well, it's not a small chump. It's not a small investment, of course. But I was wearing my old Casio Geek calculator watch a couple months before the Apple Watch came out to say, okay, do I really want to go back to wearing a watch? Because I like everybody else in 2007 when the iPhone came out said, yay, I don't have to wear a watch anymore because I've got one in my pocket. And then we're like, oh man, I'm so glad I have a watch now. Wait, what?
Yeah, I keep hearing that from people in the Apple community that are blogging and stuff that have said the same thing. They never wore a watch. Now they wore one because they really wanted to try out or test this Apple Watch thing, and now they really like it. They're used to it. They don't find it to be an inconvenience in any way, and it is more convenient not having to pull the phone out all the time. And maybe they're right. Who knows? But at this point, it's not something for me, and I can certainly wait because it's it's just the first version. So I'm curious to see how this thing progresses over time.
It's been much better than I expected. It's like I said, it wasn't cheap, and I bought it at 3:04 Eastern time, so I was 4 minutes too late to get it, on day one. But that's okay. The exercise aspect has been very nice. The heartbeat rate, the miniature applications that we use for two-factor authentication. Duo is a third-party service that we use for push notifications of second factor. So that's worked out very nicely. The Mac ID has been a great application I just found out about the other day to unlock my Mac. So if I sit down and I'm near my machine and I've installed the client on OS X and set it up, of course, on the phone and enable the app on the watch, when I get close, it says, oh, you're close, you want to unlock your Mac. That's pretty nice. So a coworker of mine gave me a tip on that. I was using Knock to unlock for a while, but that had been unreliable, always unlocking the machine or not.
I just type my password like an animal. Apparently.
You do?
Yeah.
Oh, I've tried that. I can't. Yeah. Well, my password is like 18 characters long, so this saves me a little bit.
Yeah, that's true. Being in the the environment you're in, you probably do want a password that's a little bit more substantial.
Yeah, Penn State recently we take 2FA. We've been taking 2FA very seriously, and now we're very serious about it. So yes, it's important.
I can see the advantage when you're typing a 18-character password that's using obscure characters mixed in. That would be tiring.
Yeah, right. But by the number of times that I make a mistake, if you're shoulder surfing, you're bound to get it on the third try. When I have typed it in 4 times.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I want to thank you, Justin, for being a guest on XojoTalk. It's always a pleasure chatting with you.
Absolutely.
And until next time, and as I like to point out to some guests, I may be inviting you back. This might not be your only guest role on XojoTalk. So I want to thank our listeners for listening, and be sure to subscribe and check out the show notes. Have a great day.